Welcome back to Midnight Affair Tales. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Alexander Lex Calloway had always believed in science. As one of Boston's top neurosurgeons, logic and facts ruled his world. But nothing in his medical career had prepared him for this moment. He sat in his office at St. Joseph's Medical Center, staring at the email that had just landed in his inbox. Subject: urgent, follow-up required for your DNA sample. Lex frowned. A few weeks ago, he had casually volunteered a blood sample for a research study at the hospital. It was standard practice, testing for genetic markers that could help identify risk factors for neurological diseases. But now they were calling him back? His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he reread the email. Dr. Calloway, we need to discuss your test results. Please visit the genetics lab immediately. His pulse quickened, but he told himself to stay calm. Maybe it was a simple mix-up. Maybe they just needed a second sample. He grabbed his coat and headed toward the genetics lab. Inside, Dr. Meredith Langston, the lead geneticist, looked up as he entered. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, a hesitation, a concern that sent a chill down his spine. "Lex," she said, motioning for him to sit. "There's something unusual in your results." He crossed his arms. "What do you mean?" Dr. Langston took a breath. "Your DNA markers don't match the profile of the two children you registered as your biological sons in our system." Lex blinked, feeling as if the air had been knocked out of his lungs. What? His voice was sharp, disbelief flooding through him. Dr. Langston carefully slid a file toward him. "We ran the test 3 times to confirm. Lex, you are not their biological father." Silence crashed between them. The walls of his life, his marriage, his identity, they all started to crumble in that instant. His mind screamed for an answer. If I'm not their father, then who the hell is? Lex sat in his car outside the hospital, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His heart pounded against his ribs, his mind running through every possibility. It had to be a mistake. Some kind of lab error. But Dr. Langston had been certain. 3 separate tests. 3 confirmations. His sons, his 7-year-old twin boys Noah and Liam, were not biologically his. The world tilted and a deep nausea rolled through his stomach. Juliet. His wife. The woman he had loved for over a decade. The woman who had given birth to his children, the woman he had trusted with his life. Had she known? Was this some sick joke? Lex took a deep breath, his fingers trembling as he pulled out his phone. His first instinct was to call Juliet. Demand an explanation. But no, he needed proof first. His surgeon's mind kicked in, shoving the tidal wave of emotions aside. He needed to be logical, methodical. He opened his laptop and searched for a private paternity test service. Within minutes, he had ordered a discreet at-home test kit to be delivered the next morning. That night, he went home, forcing himself to act normal. But every time he looked at Noah and Liam, his stomach twisted in knots. They were his sons. They had to be. Juliet noticed his quietness. "You okay?" she asked, brushing her fingers along his arm. He forced a smile. "Just a long day at the hospital." She kissed his cheek. "I'll make you a drink." As she walked away, Lex studied her. Had he been blind all these years? Had he missed the signs? His entire world was built on trust, love, and family. And now he wasn't sure if any of it had ever been real. That night he barely slept. Tomorrow he would have the answers. The next morning, Lex woke up before dawn, an unfamiliar tension gripping his chest. By 7 a.m., the discreet DNA test kit had arrived. He waited until Juliet took the kids to school before locking himself in his study. He followed the instructions carefully, collecting samples from Noah and Liam's toothbrushes before packaging them back into the prepaid return box. He dropped it off at a FedEx location, his hands shaking as he sealed his fate. Now all he could do was wait. That night, Lex lay in bed beside Juliet, staring at the ceiling. He could feel her warmth beside him, her familiar scent, but suddenly, everything felt like a lie. Who was she really? A memory surfaced, 7 years ago when she first told him she was pregnant. "Are you sure?" he had asked, half in shock, half in joy. "Of course," she had laughed, her arms wrapping around him. Now that moment felt like a twisted joke. The next morning, as Lex poured coffee in the kitchen, Juliet walked in, still in her silk robe, her hair slightly tousled from sleep. "You seem off," she said, watching him. Lex forced a smile. Just work stress. She leaned against the counter, sipping her tea. You sure? You've been quiet all week. He turned to her, studying her face. For the first time in years he realized he didn't know her at all. Hey, weird question, he said casually. But do you remember the night you got pregnant with the twins? Juliet blinked, caught off guard. Yeah? Why? Lex shrugged, forcing a light chuckle. Just something I was thinking about. She gave a small laugh. Well, I was on that girl's trip to Miami, remember? Then I came home and a few weeks later, surprise. The twins. His blood ran ice cold. Miami. That meant he hadn't even been in the same state when she conceived. Lex's stomach lurched. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a lab error. She had been lying to him for 7 years. He swallowed back the bile rising in his throat, forcing himself to stay calm. He wouldn't confront her yet. No. He would find out everything first. And then he would make her pay. Lex had spent his entire career as a surgeon trusting his instincts. They had saved lives, guided him through impossible cases. But now, those instincts were whispering something darker, telling him that this betrayal ran deeper than just one mistake. It was a calculated deception. A carefully crafted lie spanning 7 years. And he needed to know who else was involved. That night, after Juliet fell asleep, he quietly slipped out of bed and into his home office. He powered up his laptop and pulled up her phone records. Juliet had always been careful. No obvious red flags. But then, one number stood out. A number she had been calling for years. A number that appeared at odd hours during work trips late at night. Lex's chest tightened. The number belonged to Roman Thatcher. His best friend. His brother in everything but blood. A sick, twisted feeling crawled into his stomach. Was this even real? His mind flashed back to countless memories, holidays, family dinners, birthdays. Roman had been there for all of it. Had he been standing next to him, laughing in his face the entire time? His hands clenched into fists. He needed proof. And if Roman was the father of his children, he would make sure he regretted every second of it. Lex stared at the phone screen, his heart pounding in his ears. The number was right there. He could call Roman right now. Ask him outright. Demand answers. But no, that would be too easy. Instead, he needed to play this smart. He picked up his phone, dialing the number. The line rang once, twice. Then Roman answered. Lex. What's up, man? Roman's voice was smooth, casual. Lex forced himself to sound normal. As if his entire world hadn't just shattered. Not much, Lex said, keeping his tone light. Just wanted to check in. Been a crazy week. Roman laughed. Tell me about it. Work's been insane. Lex leaned back in his chair, gripping the phone tighter. How's Juliet? He asked, voice carefully neutral. There was the slightest pause before Roman answered. She's good. Why? Lex smirked to himself. He heard it. The hesitation. The crack in his voice. Just wondering, Lex said, playing along. You know, you two have always been close. Roman chuckled. Well, yeah, you're my best friend. I mean, I love the whole family. What? Lex's fingers dug into his desk. Yeah, he said, voice dropping. I bet you do. He ended the call without another word. As he stared at his screen, his blood boiled. He wasn't just betrayed by one person. His own best friend had stolen his life. Now, let me take a quick moment to say something important. To everyone who has been following this journey, we did it. We've hit 1,200 subscribers and I can't thank you enough for your support. But this is just the beginning. Now we set our sights on 2,000. And while you're here, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Boston? New York? LA? Or somewhere completely unexpected? Let me know. I want to see how far this story is reaching. Now, back to the chaos. Lex hadn't spoken to his mother in days. Not since the DNA test. Not since the pieces started falling into place. But now he needed answers. Eleanor Calloway was a force of nature. Cold. Calculating. Always in control. And suddenly Lex had to wonder, had she known all along? He pulled up outside her sprawling estate, stepping out of the car with a new sense of purpose. Inside, Eleanor sat in her elegant, overpriced living room, sipping tea. She barely looked up when he entered. Lex, she said smoothly. What a surprise. Lex didn't waste time. He threw the DNA test results onto the table. Did you know? His voice was ice. Eleanor picked up the papers with practiced ease. Read them. Then calmly set them down. She didn't look surprised. Lex's stomach tightened. You did, he whispered. You knew. Eleanor exhaled slowly. Lex, darling. There are things about marriage you don't understand. His jaw clenched. So you're telling me you let me raise another man's children? You stood by and watched for 7 years? She gave him a measured look. I did what was best for the family. Lex's chest burned with fury. What the hell does that mean? It means Juliet was never right for you, Eleanor said, swirling her tea. You were meant for something greater. Roman, he was always the more charming one. The more ambitious one. And he gave you those boys, didn't he? Lex felt like he had been stabbed in the heart. His own mother. She knew. She had been part of it. She had orchestrated this. Something inside him snapped. You're a monster, he said coldly. Eleanor didn't even flinch. And you're my son. One day you'll understand why I did what I did. Lex turned away, his entire world collapsing around him. His wife. His best friend. His own mother. They had all betrayed him. But they weren't ready for what came next. Because now Lex was done playing nice. Lex drove through the streets of Boston, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The city lights blurred into a haze, but his mind was razor-sharp, locked onto one thing: revenge. His mother's words echoed in his head. Roman, he was always the more charming one. The more ambitious one. And he gave you those boys, didn't he? That wasn't just betrayal. That was a death sentence. Lex had spent years saving lives in the operating room, making decisions that dictated whether someone lived or died. He had held the hands of grieving families, fought to bring people back from the brink of death. But tonight, for the first time, he felt like a killer. The weight of 7 years of deception pressed on his chest like an anchor, dragging him into the abyss. His best friend. His wife. His own mother. They had played him, humiliated him. And now they were going to learn what it felt like to be on the other side. He pulled into a parking garage downtown, shutting off his engine. His contact was waiting. The private investigator, Derek Vance, leaned against a black sedan, cigarette dangling from his lips. A man with a reputation for uncovering secrets that people would kill to keep buried. Lex stepped out, his pulse pounding. Tell me what you found. Derek took a slow drag before tossing the cigarette. You were right to be suspicious. He handed Lex a thick folder, bound together with a red elastic band. Lex opened it, and what he saw inside nearly made him sick. Bank statements. Secret accounts. Hotel records. And at the center of it all, Juliet and Roman, entangled for 7 goddamn years. Lex's stomach churned as he flipped through surveillance photos. Juliet and Roman in a hotel lounge, laughing over drinks. Juliet leaving a penthouse suite at 3 a.m. And then, the final dagger, a hospital record from 7 years ago. A paternity test. Signed by Roman Thatcher. Lex's hands trembled, the folder crumpling under his grip. They knew, Derek said, his voice low. Juliet and Roman knew from the start. They ran a DNA test the moment she got pregnant. They knew the twins weren't yours, and they let you raise them anyway. Lex's breath came in sharp, shallow bursts. This wasn't just an affair. This was a scheme. A 7-year-long conspiracy. And now they were going to pay for it. Lex spent the next 48 hours meticulously crafting his revenge. He didn't just want to destroy them. He wanted to obliterate them. The first move? Make them feel safe. That night he cooked dinner. He smiled at Juliet, poured her wine, kissed her forehead like nothing had changed. Sorry I've been distracted lately, he said, voice warm, smooth. Work's been overwhelming. Juliet exhaled, visibly relieved. I thought something was wrong. He chuckled. Wrong? Everything was wrong. But soon she'd be the one drowning in panic. She leaned in, running her fingers through his hair. I miss this. Us. Lex nearly laughed. The audacity of this woman. He kissed her back, slow and deep, feeling her relax into him. And in that moment he thought of Roman. Of his mother. Of all the nights Juliet had probably come home after being in another man's bed. His jaw tightened. Stay in control. One wrong move and he'd lose the chance to watch her entire world crumble. Step 2. Test the loyalty of a traitor. The next day Lex texted Roman. Lex, hey man. Drinks tonight? Been a while. Roman's reply came quick. Roman, hell yeah. I was actually about to call you. Same bar? Lex smirked. Bastard didn't suspect a thing. By 8 p.m. they were sitting at their usual booth, Roman grinning over a whiskey. "You looked stressed, man," Roman said, clinking his glass against Lex's. "You sure you're good?" Lex took a slow sip. "Juliet and I are trying for another kid." Roman choked on his drink. Lex watched every flicker of panic on his face. The way his fingers tightened around the glass. The way his eyes darted away for a second too long. "Shit," Roman coughed, forcing a laugh. "That's great. You excited?" Lex leaned back, swirling his whiskey. "Gotcha, you son of a bitch." "Oh yeah," he said. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about bloodlines. Genetics. Crazy stuff." Roman froze. Lex saw it, the barely contained fear. And in that moment he knew. Roman suspected that Lex had found out. Game on. Lex had the proof. The bank records, the surveillance photos, the paternity test signed by Roman himself. But he wanted to see just how deep the rabbit hole went. So he played dumb. And he watched. That night, after Juliet fell asleep, Lex unlocked her phone. He had never invaded her privacy before, but that was the past. There were no rules anymore. He scrolled through her messages. And there it was. The final nail in her coffin. "Juliet, you've been so quiet lately. Lex is acting weird. Do you think he knows?" Roman, "Nah man. He's too trusting. He wouldn't even suspect it." "Juliet, I don't know. I feel like he's looking at me differently." Roman, "Relax babe. Even if he did find out, what's he gonna do? He's too soft to actually hurt us." Lex grinned. "Too soft?" They had no idea who they were dealing with. He put her phone back and walked out onto the balcony. The Boston skyline stretched before him, the city alive with lights and noise. By this time next week, their world would be reduced to ashes. Juliet, Roman, Eleanor, they had taken everything from him. Now it was time to take everything from them. No mercy. No forgiveness. Lex was a man of precision. In the operating room, every incision, every suture had to be executed with absolute control. One wrong move and a life could be lost. But this was a different kind of surgery. He wasn't saving lives anymore. He was destroying them. As he stood in his office, staring at the wall lined with framed medical degrees and accolades, he realized something. His entire life had been built on a lie. The wife he trusted. The best friend he called a brother. The mother who was supposed to protect him. They had played him for 7 years. Now it was his turn to play them. He sat at his desk, opening his laptop. Step 1, financial ruin. Lex had access to Juliet's bank accounts. Over the years, he had been the primary provider, depositing money into their joint accounts, ensuring she lived comfortably. But now, that comfort was over. Lex slowly drained the accounts, transferring money into a private fund that she had no access to. Within hours, her cards would start declining. Step 2, public humiliation. He compiled every piece of evidence, the photos, the messages, the paternity test, and created a digital folder. It would be his weapon. Step 3, cutting off his mother's influence. Eleanor Callaway thrived on power. She sat on charity boards, controlled business deals, and had an iron grip on Boston's elite. But Lex had one thing she didn't: secrets. He picked up his phone and called his lawyer. "I need to make some changes to my will," Lex said, his voice calm, controlled. The lawyer hesitated. "Everything okay, Dr. Callaway?" Lex smirked. "Oh, it's about to be." By the time this was over, Juliet, Roman, and Eleanor would be left with nothing. And that was just the beginning. Juliet stood in the kitchen, staring at her phone, her face twisted in frustration. "What the hell is going on?" she muttered. Lex leaned against the doorway watching her. She had no idea he was onto her. She tried to swipe her card at the grocery store earlier, declined. Tried to pay for her Pilates class, declined. She was panicking. Something wrong? Lex asked casually, sipping his coffee. She turned to him, faking a smile. But he saw it, the flicker of fear in her eyes. "Just a banking issue," she said. "Probably a glitch." Lex took a slow sip. That's weird." Juliet gave a nervous laugh. "Yeah. Probably nothing." She was trying to convince herself. Lex let her stew in it. He wanted her to feel the walls closing in. Later that night he received a text. "Roman, hey man. You busy?" Lex's jaw tightened. This bastard still had the nerve to act like his friend. He replied. "What's up?" "Roman, something feels off with Juliet. She's been acting weird. I think she's worried about something. Lex nearly laughed. Oh, she should be worried. They both should. But instead he played along. Really? I'll talk to her. Roman sent back a thumbs-up emoji. Lex set his phone down, his mind racing. Juliet and Roman were starting to sweat. It was time for the next move. The next morning, Lex sat in his office at the hospital, going over a patient's chart. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Check your email. No. Lex frowned, opening his laptop. A single email sat in his inbox. Subject: You're not the only one who knows. His stomach clenched as he clicked the attachment. A photo loaded on the screen. Juliet. Roman. Together. But this wasn't one of the surveillance photos Derek had sent him. This was taken last week. Lex's pulse pounded. Someone else was watching them. Another message came in. Unknown number. You think you're in control? You're not. There are more secrets than you know. Lex's hands tightened into fists. Who the hell was this? His mind raced through the possibilities. Could it be his mother? Someone else Juliet was involved with? Then another message popped up. Unknown number. You're playing a game, Lex. But you don't know all the players. Lex exhaled slowly. Fine. If someone else was watching, if someone else had secrets, he'd find them. And when he did, he'd destroy them too. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was war. Lex sat in his car outside the hospital, staring at the cryptic messages on his phone. Someone else was watching. Someone else knew. But the question was, were they a friend or an enemy? He took a deep breath and typed out a response. Lex, who are you? What do you know? The three dots appeared. Whoever it was, they were ready to talk. Unknown number. You're playing a game you don't fully understand. There's more than just Roman and Juliet. This runs deeper. Lex's grip on his phone tightened. Lex, deeper how? No response. Lex's gut twisted. Whoever this was, they wanted him to dig further. And that meant he wasn't done uncovering the truth. Later that night, he met Derek, his private investigator, in a secluded bar. The place was nearly empty, dim lighting, quiet conversations, and no one paying attention to them. Lex slid into the booth. I need you to go deeper. Juliet and Roman were just the surface. There's something bigger. Derek nodded, sliding a thick file across the table. I already started. Lex opened it. His pulse spiked. Inside were emails between Juliet and someone else. Not Roman. Someone bigger. Someone powerful. A name he never expected to see. Lex's world tilted. This was worse than he thought. And now it was time to burn everything to the ground. Lex had spent years saving lives. Now he was ready to ruin them. The next morning, Juliet woke up to her worst nightmare. Her accounts were frozen. She tried to book her usual spa appointment. Declined. She tried to shop. Declined. And then the real panic set in. Her phone rang. It was the bank. Mrs. Calloway, we have reason to believe that unauthorized withdrawals have been made from your account. What? Juliet's voice rose. That's not possible. I didn't touch anything. The banker sighed. We have documentation showing the transfers were made by the primary account holder, Dr. Calloway. Juliet's blood ran cold. Lex. Her hands shook as she ended the call. She turned and there he was. Standing in the doorway, calm, composed. She swallowed hard. Lex, what's going on? He tilted his head, watching her. Watching her break. You should sit down, Juliet, he said smoothly. You're going to need it. She backed away, panic in her eyes. Where's our money? Lex took a slow step forward. Our money? No, Juliet. It was never ours. It was mine. And now it's gone. Just like our marriage. Her breath hitched. Lex, I can explain. I already know, he cut her off. Every lie. Every affair. Every disgusting, treacherous thing you did with Roman. Juliet's face drained of color. Lex leaned closer, his voice a deadly whisper. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She was speechless. Trapped. Exposed. Lex smirked. Don't worry, sweetheart. This is just the beginning. And with that, he walked out, leaving her drowning in the consequences of her own betrayal. Roman Thatcher had always been the charming one. The man with the silver tongue, the perfect reputation, the life everyone envied. Until today. Sitting in his sleek downtown office, he sipped his coffee, scrolling through emails. Then his phone buzzed. A notification. A news alert. His brow furrowed as he clicked it. And then, his world stopped. Exposed, high-powered attorney Roman Thatcher caught in 7-year affair with best friend's wife. His entire affair with Juliet was plastered across every major news site. Every photo, every bank transaction, every leaked message. His heart pounded. What the hell? A second later, his office door slammed open. His boss, James Lockwood, stormed in, throwing a newspaper on his desk. What the hell is this? Lockwood's face was red with fury. This scandal? Your name is attached to it. Roman's mouth went dry. I can explain. There's nothing to explain. Lockwood snapped. Do you know what this does to the firm's reputation? The clients we've lost in the last hour alone? You're toxic now, Roman. Roman's stomach dropped. Wait, are you firing me? Lockwood's expression was ice cold. You're done. The words hit like a bullet. Roman, the untouchable, was now a disgrace. And then his phone rang. Juliet. He ignored it. He knew what she wanted. But it didn't matter. Because now they were both drowning. And at the center of it all? Lex Calloway. Roman's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't over. Not yet. Juliet had never known what it felt like to be powerless. For years, she had been the one in control, manipulating, deceiving, playing the perfect wife while keeping her darkest secrets buried. But now, everything was falling apart. Her bank accounts were empty. Her credit cards were frozen. Her entire financial security was gone overnight like it had never existed. Panic clawed at her chest as she scrolled through her phone, desperately searching for a way out. She called the bank. Declined. She called her financial advisor. I'm sorry, but Dr. Calloway has already transferred everything. She gritted her teeth and dialed Roman. Voicemail. Her hands trembled as she texted him. Juliet, where the hell are you? We need to talk. Now. No response. Her breath came fast, erratic. Lex had planned this. He had destroyed everything methodically, piece by piece. But he hadn't won yet. She grabbed her coat and stormed out the door. She still had one card left to play. She was going to confront Lex head-on. And she was going to win him back, no matter what it took. Lex sat in his study, sipping whiskey as he watched the storm outside. The house was eerily quiet. Until he heard the front door slam open. He didn't even have to look. He knew who it was. Juliet. She walked in like a woman on a mission, barefoot, her silk robe hanging open just enough to be suggestive. Her blonde hair was tousled, her lips parted, a look of desperation mixed with seduction in her eyes. Lex, she breathed, stepping toward him. We need to talk. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He let the silence stretch until the tension was suffocating. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, tilting his glass. I don't think we do. Her eyes flashed with something dark. You're angry. I get it. I screwed up. I should have told you the truth. He chuckled, low and humorless. The truth? Juliet, you let me raise another man's kids. She flinched. But they're still your boys. Blood doesn't change that. Lex took a slow sip, watching her unravel. You know what's funny? He mused. For a while I thought maybe you felt guilty. Maybe you were just scared. Her lip quivered. Lex, He cut her off. But now I see the truth. You never felt guilty. Not once. You enjoyed playing me. Manipulating me. Tears welled in her eyes. That's not true. She took a step closer, hands trembling as she reached for him. I love you, Lex. I always have. And I know, if we can just fix this. Lex grabbed her wrist. Not gently. She gasped, eyes wide, finally seeing something she had never seen before. Lex wasn't the soft-hearted husband she had controlled for years. That man was gone. You don't love me, he said coldly. You love power. You love security. Her breath hitched. He leaned in, his voice a whisper against her skin. And now you have nothing. She stared at him, realization hitting her like a brick wall. Lex was done with her. Forever. And for the first time. Juliet Calloway was truly afraid. Roman paced his penthouse, heart pounding. His entire career had gone up in flames. The law firm had cut him off. His name was now a scandal attached to every headline. And worst of all, Lex had done it. Lex, the man he had once called his best friend, had outplayed him. His phone buzzed. Juliet. He hesitated. Then, with a frustrated growl, he answered. Roman. Her voice was frantic. We have to do something. Roman ran a hand through his hair, rage boiling beneath his skin. What the hell do you think I've been trying to do? My life is in ruins, Juliet. Mine too, she hissed. Lex, he took everything. I have no money, no credit, nothing. I tried talking to him, but... Roman's jaw clenched. He's not backing down. She took a shaky breath. No, he's not. Roman slammed his fist against the table. I should have ended this when I had the chance. Juliet was silent for a beat. Then she whispered, maybe it's time we do. Roman froze. Her voice was softer now. Calculating. Dangerous. If we don't stop him now, she continued, we're going to lose everything. Roman exhaled slowly. What are you saying? I'm saying, she murmured, maybe it's time we make Lex disappear. Silence. Then Roman laughed. A dark, twisted laugh. Because maybe, just maybe, she was right. Lex knew. He could feel it. Juliet and Roman were plotting something. And that meant one thing, they were desperate. Desperate people were dangerous. But they were also stupid. Lex had spent his entire life anticipating disaster. In the operating room, he had saved patients by knowing what was coming before it even happened. And now he was applying the same logic to his revenge. Juliet and Roman thought they were in control? They had no idea they were walking into a trap. He made his move the next morning. Step 1, let them believe he was vulnerable. Lex called Juliet. Meet me for coffee, he said, his voice measured. We need to talk. She hesitated. Then, too eager, she agreed. Step 2, lay the bait. They met at a small cafe downtown. Lex watched as Juliet walked in, her expression perfectly rehearsed, soft, apologetic, fake. She sat across from him, folding her hands like she was the victim. Lex, I'm tired, he interrupted, rubbing his temples like a man at his breaking point. This whole thing, it's destroying me. She blinked, thrown off. Good. Take the bait. I don't know if I can keep fighting you, Jules, he sighed. I want this to end. Her lips parted slightly. Then relief. This was what she wanted. Lex to be weak. Lex to surrender. She reached across the table, touching his hand. Maybe we don't have to fight. Maybe we can figure this out together. Lex forced a sad smile. Let her believe she was winning. Let her believe she had control. Because the moment she tried to strike, he would be ready. Roman sat in his penthouse, swirling whiskey in a glass. He had lost everything. His career. His clients. His status. And Lex was to blame. His phone buzzed. Juliet, he's cracking. We have to move now. Roman smirked. Finally. It was time. Time to erase Lex Calloway from the picture forever. 2 hours later, he met Juliet in a dimly lit parking garage. She was waiting in her car, her fingers tapping anxiously against the wheel. When Roman slid into the passenger seat, she turned to him with wild eyes. He's giving up, she whispered. He wants to stop fighting. Roman scoffed. Bullshit. He's playing you. Her jaw clenched. I don't care. We're doing this tonight. Roman studied her. He had never seen her like this before, desperate, reckless, fully unhinged. She wasn't thinking straight. But that was fine. Because he was. He leaned closer. I have a guy. He'll take care of it. Juliet exhaled sharply. You mean? Roman nodded. Yes. Lex Calloway had destroyed them. Now, they would return the favor. But before we go any further, I just want to take a second to say, thank you. We've officially hit 1,200 subscribers. And honestly, this is just the start. So now, let's push for 2,000. And while you're here, tell me something. Drop a comment and let me know. Where are you watching from? Are you from New York, LA, Chicago? Or maybe somewhere unexpected? Tell me. Because I love knowing how far this story is reaching. Now, back to the storm. Lex sat in his car, parked outside his own home. His gut told him something was coming. And he was right. His security cameras picked up movement at 1:47 a.m. A black SUV rolled to a stop at the end of his street. A man stepped out, tall, broad, moving like a predator. Lex's stomach tightened. He had seen men like this before, cold, calculated, hired for one purpose. This wasn't a robbery. This was an execution. Juliet and Roman had sent someone to kill him. Lex exhaled slowly. Good. Because now, Now he had everything he needed to bury them for good. Lex had been waiting for this. He watched through his security cameras as the hitman approached his house, moving with practiced silence. A man like this? Professional. Cold. Paid to make people disappear. And Juliet and Roman? They had just signed his death warrant. Lex remained calm, unshaken. He had outthought surgeons on the operating table, outmaneuvered death in ways people couldn't imagine. This was just another game. He tapped into his phone, pulling up the emergency security system he had installed weeks ago. With the push of a button, the entire house went into lockdown. The doors bolted shut. The windows reinforced. The hitman froze. Trap. Lex smirked. Checkmate. He grabbed his gun from the safe. He had no intention of using it, not yet. But it was time to send a message. He stepped out onto his porch, standing under the dim glow of the street lamp. The hitman turned, startled, realizing the job had gone wrong. Lex tilted his head, studying him. You weren't sent to rob me. The man said nothing. Lex took a slow step forward, voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You were sent to kill me. The hitman exhaled, jaw tightening. Nothing personal. Lex let out a small laugh. I bet they paid you well. The hitman hesitated. He had seen the look in men's eyes before they died. The fear. The pleading. But Lex. There was nothing but cold amusement. Tell me, Lex continued, how does it feel to realize you walked into a trap? Before the hitman could respond, Lex held up his phone. One tap. One call. And within minutes, police sirens filled the night. The hitman turned, ready to run. But it was too late. Lex had won. Juliet was pacing in Roman's apartment, nerves shot. The plan was supposed to be simple. Clean. Untraceable. Lex would be gone. No more threats. No more watching their lives collapse. But now, there were police cars outside his house. Roman was on the phone trying to get in contact with their hitman. Nothing. No response. Juliet swallowed hard. Something's wrong. Roman rubbed his temples. No shit, Juliet. She spun around, grabbing his arm. We have to fix this. If he talks. Roman yanked away. You think I don't know that? Juliet's chest tightened. This was spiraling out of control. They had crossed a line tonight. And now Lex had the upper hand. Her phone buzzed. A message. Her hands shook as she read it. Lex, I know what you did. And now, you're going to pay for it. Juliet's breath caught. Roman grabbed the phone, reading it over her shoulder. His jaw tightened. He's bluffing. Juliet wasn't so sure. Because the way Lex had always been 2 steps ahead, this wasn't a bluff. This was a promise. Eleanor Calloway was not an easy woman to break. She had built her life on power, influence, control. But now, she was losing all of it. Lex had cut her off. Her money. Her access. Her reputation. She had tried to manipulate him, to remind him that family comes first. But Lex wasn't the boy she once controlled. And she had underestimated just how much of her own ruthlessness had passed down to him. Now she sat in her study, sipping a glass of bourbon, plotting her next move. A knock at the door. She sighed, already knowing who it was. Juliet and Roman. Desperate. Stupid. Predictable. She opened the door, arching an eyebrow as they stepped inside. Juliet's face was pale, her usual confidence cracked. Roman looked furious. Restless. Eleanor smirked, sitting back down. I assume things didn't go as planned? Juliet folded her arms. Lex is still alive. Eleanor let out a soft chuckle. Shocking. Roman gritted his teeth. We need to know what to do next. He's winning, Eleanor. If we don't stop him now. Eleanor raised a hand, silencing him. She took a slow sip of her drink, watching them squirm. You too, she said, have always been impulsive. Predictable. Sloppy. Juliet stiffened. Excuse me? Eleanor smiled. You thought killing Lex would be the answer? How boring. How common. She leaned forward, her voice turning icy. If you want to truly destroy a man, you don't kill him. She set her glass down. You take away everything he loves. Juliet and Roman exchanged a look. And Eleanor smiled. Because she had just found her way back into the game. Eleanor Calloway had spent a lifetime building an empire. She had maneuvered Boston's elite like a chessboard, turning social connections into power, marriages into alliances, and secrets into weapons. And now, She was going to do it one last time. Juliet and Roman sat stiffly in her study, waiting for instructions. She loved this, watching them squirm, watching their fear bloom into desperation. She took another slow sip of her bourbon, letting the silence stretch, letting them feel powerless. Finally, she set the glass down. Killing Lex was a childish idea. Roman tensed. It would have worked if he hadn't. Eleanor cut him off with a cold smile. Roman dear, you've always been brilliant at law but absolute garbage at strategy. His jaw clenched. She turned her gaze to Juliet. And you? She exhaled, tilting her head. You had Lex in the palm of your hand for years. And you wasted it. Juliet's fingers tightened against the chair. Then tell us what to do. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice soft, deadly. You want to win? She asked. You don't take Lex's life. You take his children. Juliet's breath hitched. Roman stilled. Eleanor smirked. His boys are his weakness. If you take them away, you take everything. Juliet's eyes darkened. Roman exhaled slowly. Custody battle? Eleanor nodded. More than that. She leaned back, watching the wheels turn in their heads. You don't just fight for custody. Her smile widened. You ruin him so completely that he has no chance of keeping them. Juliet sat back, her lips pressing together. Lex had already taken everything from her. Maybe it was time to take everything from him. Lex walked into his lawyer's office, feeling the weight of what was coming. Derek Vance, his private investigator, had already warned him. Juliet was coming for the twins. Not because she loved them. Not because she suddenly wanted to be a mother. But because she wanted to hurt him. Lex sat across from his lawyer, Andrew Lane, a man known for winning impossible cases. Andrew slid a folder across the desk. They filed this morning. Juliet is pushing for full custody. Lex took a slow breath, his hands tightening around the papers. She doesn't have a case, Lex said. I'm the one who's raised them. She barely. She has Eleanor Calloway, Andrew cut in. And that means she has power. Lex's chest tightened. His mother. Of course. Eleanor could pull strings in ways most people didn't even know existed. Judges. Political favors. The kind of influence that didn't show up on paper, but decided court cases behind closed doors. Lex leaned forward. What are our chances? Andrew hesitated. If we play it like a normal case? Not great. Lex's jaw clenched. Juliet was a proven liar. A manipulator. A woman who had abandoned their kids in favor of affairs and lavish vacations. But in the eyes of the court, mothers were always favored. Lex had to be ruthless. I want every piece of dirt on her, he said. Andrew nodded. Already working on it. Lex exhaled, his fury sharpening into something lethal. Juliet wanted a war? She was about to get one. Juliet sat across from her lawyer, smirking. This will be easy, she said. Her lawyer, Patricia Cross, gave her a skeptical look. You do realize this isn't just about what you want, right? You need evidence that Lex is an unfit parent. Juliet's fingers drummed against the table. I'll find something. Patricia exhaled. Lex is a world-class surgeon. A respected figure. Clean record. No history of abuse. The court favors stability, and Lex is the definition of stability. Juliet forced a smile. That's why we make him look unstable. Patricia arched a brow. And how do you plan to do that? Juliet leaned in. Simple, she said. We make him look like a dangerous man. Meanwhile, Lex was preparing his own attack. He sat with Derek Vance, going through file after file of evidence against Juliet. Abandoned PDA meetings. Partying in Miami. Questionable financial transactions. And then, the worst of it. Derek placed a single file on the table. Lex opened it. An old hospital report. His stomach dropped. Juliet had been pregnant before the twins. Lex had never known. Because she had terminated it. Not because she didn't want kids. But because it wasn't his. Lex's fingers curled into fists. This wasn't just betrayal. This was proof. Proof that Juliet had never been faithful. Proof that could destroy her in court. Derek leaned back. We drop this bomb? She'll never recover. Lex exhaled. She wanted to play dirty? Then they were going to play dirty. Juliet Calloway was a lot of things. A liar, a manipulator, a woman who thrived on control. But above all, she was a survivor. She had built her life on deception, climbing her way into Boston's elite through carefully crafted lies, marrying Lex not for love but for power. And now, she was going to take everything back. Sitting in her lawyer's office, she forced tears into her eyes. She was good at this, playing the broken woman, the victim. The loving mother who only wanted to protect her children. Patricia Cross, her attorney, studied her with sharp eyes. "This isn't going to be easy," Patricia said, flipping through a stack of papers. "Lex has an impeccable reputation. The court will look at him as the more stable parent." Juliet sniffled, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "But what if he's not stable?" Patricia frowned. "Meaning?" Juliet leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Lex is under an insane amount of stress. His job as a neurosurgeon? It's high pressure. Long hours. Sometimes he goes days without sleeping. He's obsessed with his work." Patricia nodded slowly. "Go on." Juliet sighed dramatically. "And after the betrayal came out, he's been different. Angry. Erratic. I don't feel safe around him anymore." Patricia's gaze sharpened. "Are you saying he's violent?" Juliet bit her lip, letting silence stretch. Letting Patricia fill in the blanks. Patricia exhaled. "If we're going to make this argument, we need something solid." Juliet's heart pounded. She had expected this. And that's why she had been recording. She reached into her bag, pulling out her phone. "I have something." She hit play. Lex's voice filled the room, low, cold, dangerous. "You don't love me, Juliet. You love power. You love security. And now you have nothing." Patricia listened, her expression unreadable. Finally she looked up. "This could work." Juliet smiled. Because this was just the beginning. Lex wasn't stupid. He knew Juliet was planning something. She was too quiet, too careful, too controlled. And when she was controlled, she was dangerous. Sitting in his lawyer's office, Lex flipped through the paperwork. "She's going to try to make me look unstable," he muttered. Andrew Lane, his attorney, nodded. "Exactly. It's a classic strategy. Paint you as an overworked, emotionally volatile parent." Lex exhaled slowly. "But it won't work." Andrew leaned back in his chair. "Not unless she has proof." Lex's chest tightened. Proof. Juliet was many things, but she was not sloppy. If she was coming after him, she had something. His phone buzzed. A message. From Juliet. "Juliet, we need to talk. Meet me at the house." Lex stared at the message, his mind calculating. This wasn't an apology. This wasn't a plea. This was a trap. And he was going to walk right into it. That evening, Lex drove to their house, the house he had once called home. The moment he stepped inside, he knew. Juliet was waiting in the living room, looking perfectly rehearsed, messy hair, bare feet, oversized sweater, like she had been crying for hours. She was playing her part. "Lex," she whispered, voice soft. "Can we please talk?" Lex studied her. "I don't think there's anything left to say." She stepped closer. "I don't want this fight. The kids need both of us." Lex tilted his head. "That's funny. Because from what I hear, you're fighting for full custody." Juliet exhaled sharply. "I have to. You're..." She cut herself off. Lex caught it. He smirked. "Go on. Say it." She swallowed hard. "You're not well, Lex. You're angry. You're not thinking straight." Lex chuckled darkly. "Ah, there it is." Juliet flinched. She had expected him to explode. To shout. But Lex was ice cold. He took a slow step forward, lowering his voice. "You want to paint me as the dangerous one? Fine. Play your game. But let me warn you, Juliet." He leaned in, eyes locking onto hers. "I don't lose." Her breath hitched. Fear flickered across her face. Because for the first time she realized Lex wasn't playing anymore. This was war. And he was going to destroy her. Eleanor Calloway sat in her penthouse, sipping a glass of scotch. She had spent decades controlling this city. And she had no intention of losing that power now. But then her phone rang. A blocked number. She answered. "Who is this?" A voice low and steady. "Derek Vance." "Eleanor Calloway," he said smoothly. "How does it feel to know your secrets are about to come crashing down?" Eleanor froze. Her heart pounded. No one threatened her. "What do you want?" she said coolly. Derek chuckled. "Not me. Lex." Eleanor's grip on the glass tightened. "Lex. Of course. That boy had always been too smart for his own good. What does he think he has? She asked. Derek hummed. Oh, Eleanor. He doesn't think he has something. He knows. Eleanor exhaled slowly. You're bluffing. No, sweetheart, Derek said. You are. A beat of silence. Then Derek continued. Shall we start with your offshore accounts? Or the fact that you bribed a judge to throw a case? Oh, and let's not forget your little real estate scam. You know, the one where you stole millions from those charity projects. Eleanor's blood ran cold. This wasn't possible. No one knew about that. No one. Derek sighed. Lex has everything, Eleanor. And you? You're running out of time. Eleanor's hands shook. Lex was coming for her. And this time? She wasn't sure she could stop him. Juliet had always been in control. She had manipulated, twisted, and orchestrated every aspect of her life to suit her needs. She had turned Lex into a puppet husband, convinced Roman to be her secret escape, and played the role of a devoted wife while indulging in the kind of betrayal that would break lesser men. But now, she was losing. She gritted her teeth, gripping the armrests of her chair in Patricia Cross's office. This wasn't supposed to happen. Lex is too smart, Patricia admitted, flipping through the latest case filings. He's anticipated every move we've made. Juliet clenched her fists. We need to hit him where it hurts. Patricia exhaled, setting down a file. We tried. The unstable angle isn't going to work. He has too many character witnesses. His reputation is spotless. And worse? He has dirt on you. Juliet's pulse spiked. What kind of dirt? Patricia gave her a knowing look. Juliet. The abortion. The room spun. Juliet's fingers went numb. How did he find out? Lex has resources. A damn good investigator, Patricia said flatly. If this comes up in court, the judge will see it as a pattern. That you've been lying since the beginning. Juliet couldn't breathe. Lex had destroyed her financially. He had ruined Roman. And now, he had the one thing that could make her lose the only leverage she had left. The twins. She couldn't let that happen. She had one option left. One last hope. She needed Roman. And this time? She was going to force him to finish what they started. Roman Thatcher was a man who always landed on his feet. Even now, as his career was in ashes, as his reputation was shattered, he still believed he could find a way out. Because that's what he did. He survived. But Lex had gone too far. He sat alone in his penthouse, a half-empty whiskey bottle on the table in front of him, his mind racing. His firm had cut ties. His clients had abandoned him. His bank accounts were frozen. Lex had taken everything. And now, Juliet was calling him, telling him they needed to end this. He picked up on the second ring. What do you want? Juliet's voice was sharp. We're losing Roman. If we don't do something now, we're going to lose everything. Roman laughed bitterly. Juliet, we already lost everything. She wasn't listening. Lex has dirt on me. If he uses it, I'll never see the twins again. You need to fix this. Roman rubbed his temples. What do you expect me to do? The custody hearing is in 2 days. He's already beaten us. Silence. Then Juliet's voice dropped to a whisper. Not if he's dead. Roman's breath caught. What? You heard me, she hissed. We should have finished this the first time. The hitman failed. We won't make the same mistake twice. Roman closed his eyes, gripping the phone tighter. Juliet was unhinged. But the worst part? A part of him agreed. If Lex was gone, this all disappeared. No more ruined reputations. No more threats. No more losing. And as he sat in the wreckage of his once perfect life, he realized something. Juliet wasn't asking. She was demanding. And for the first time, Roman wondered, had he ever really been in control? Lex Calloway wasn't surprised when Roman called. He had been waiting. The pieces were falling exactly as he had planned. Roman was crumbling. He had lost too much too fast. And now, he was desperate. Lex answered smoothly. Roman. Roman hesitated. Lex, can we talk? Lex smirked. There it was. The weakness. Talk about what? Roman exhaled. Juliet. She's losing it. She's talking about doing something dangerous. Lex leaned back in his chair. Interesting. She wants me to help her, Roman admitted. Lex played along. Help her with what? Roman's voice was low. You know what? Lex let the silence stretch. letting Roman drown in his own guilt. Finally, Lex sighed. I never thought you'd let her control you like this, Roman. Roman scoffed. Says the guy who let her play him for 7 years. Lex grinned. And look where that got you. Roman's breath hitched. Lex wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. He was calm. In control. And suddenly Roman realized, this had never been a fair fight. Lex had been outplaying them since the beginning. Tell me something, Roman, Lex said smoothly. Do you really think Juliet gives a damn about you? She used you. She used me. And when she's done, she'll throw you away too. Roman swallowed hard. I don't know what to do. Lex had him. The final betrayal wasn't Roman betraying Lex. It was Lex making Roman betray Juliet. You have a choice, Lex said. You can go down with her. Or you can save yourself. Roman's pulse pounded. Juliet had ruined him. She had convinced him they could have it all, and now? She was leading him straight to his own destruction. Roman wasn't going to let that happen. I'll do whatever you need, he said. Just get me out of this. Lex smiled. Good, he said. Then let's end this. Together. Roman sat alone in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Juliet had dragged him into hell. For years she had whispered promises in his ear. Told him they would end up together. That Lex would never find out. That they would win. But now, everything was gone. His career? Destroyed. His reputation? Ruined. His life? A shadow of what it once was. And Juliet was still asking him to fight a war that was already lost. He ran a hand down his face, his heart pounding as he stared at his phone. Lex had given him a way out. A chance to survive. All he had to do? Betray Juliet. He hesitated, staring at her name on his contact list. He could feel it, this was a moment of no return. But then he thought about everything she had cost him. The years of lies. The manipulation. The destruction of his life, all because she couldn't stop playing her games. His jaw clenched. He pressed call. Juliet picked up on the first ring. Roman, she breathed. What's wrong? Roman forced his voice to shake. Juliet, Lex knows. He told me he's going to release everything in court. He's going to use my past cases against me. Silence. Then exactly what he expected. Meet me, she whispered. We need to talk. Now. Roman closed his eyes. She was still playing him. Still thinking she could control him. But this time? She was walking straight into a trap. Lex sat in his office, his fingers tapping against the polished mahogany desk. The pieces were moving exactly as he had planned. Roman had folded. Predictable. Juliet was panicking. Even more predictable. And Eleanor? Her house of secrets was beginning to burn. He pulled up his phone, reading the latest email from Derek Vance. The final file he needed. A bank transfer from 7 years ago. The very first payment Roman had ever sent to Juliet. Proof that she had been planning this from the very beginning. Lex let out a slow breath. Juliet thought she was about to outmaneuver him. She thought she could still win. But the moment she stepped into that meeting with Roman, she was done. Lex picked up his phone and called Roman. She took the bait? He asked. Roman hesitated. Yeah. She thinks I'm coming to help her. Lex smirked. Of course she does. She thinks she's untouchable. A beat of silence. Then Roman exhaled. You're sure this will work? Lex's expression turned ice cold. Oh, I'm counting on it. He ended the call and leaned back in his chair. Juliet had played him for years. Lied to him. Stolen from him. And now, it was time for her to feel what it was like to lose everything. Juliet arrived at the meeting spot, a luxury hotel lounge, quiet and discreet. She scanned the room, her nerves electric. Roman was already there, sitting in the corner booth. He looked wrecked. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes. She slid into the seat across from him. Tell me everything, she demanded. Roman exhaled, shaking his head. Lex, he's not backing down. He has everything, Juliet. The paternity test, the bank transfers, even my past clients' dirty dealings. He's going to ruin us in court. Juliet swallowed hard. So what do we do? Roman hesitated. I don't know if we can do anything. He's too far ahead. Juliet's nails dug into the table. No, she hissed. I won't let him take my kids. I won't let him win. Roman's jaw tensed. Juliet's pulse pounded. She had one last move left. Maybe we need to make him look bad, she whispered. Make it so no one believes his side of the story. Roman glanced up at her. How? She leaned in closer. What if we plant something? Maybe drugs, maybe. She stopped. Roman wasn't looking at her anymore. His gaze had shifted to something behind her. No, not something. Someone. Juliet turned slowly, her breath catching. Lex, standing right there watching. Her stomach plummeted. Lex smiled. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. Go on, Juliet, he said smoothly. I'd love to hear the rest of your plan. Juliet's entire body went cold. Because she knew, this was it. She had just lost. Juliet couldn't move. Her mouth went dry. Her pulse pounded. Lex was standing right in front of her. He had heard everything. He knew everything. Her entire body went numb as she forced herself to meet his gaze. Lex, she whispered, her voice shaking. It's not what you think. Lex chuckled, slow and dark. Oh, Juliet. It's exactly what I think. She turned to Roman in panic. You set me up? Roman looked away. Guilty. Ashamed. Trapped. Lex leaned against the booth, crossing his arms. Here's the thing, sweetheart, he said smoothly. This entire time you thought you were outsmarting me. You thought you could lie, manipulate, and walk away untouched. Juliet swallowed hard. Lex didn't let her finish. But here's what you didn't count on, he continued. That the very person you used, the very person you convinced to betray me, would betray you instead. Roman exhaled shakily. He couldn't even look at her. Juliet's breath hitched. She felt the weight of the moment crash down on her. This wasn't a fight anymore. This was her execution. Lex pulled his phone out of his pocket and with a single tap played the recording. Juliet's voice echoed through the restaurant. Maybe we need to make him look bad. Maybe plant something, drugs maybe. A few customers turned their heads. The air shifted. Juliet felt her heart stop. Lex tilted his head. I'm curious, Juliet. How do you think a judge will react to that? Knowing the mother of 2 children is out here plotting crimes against their father. Juliet's nails dug into the table. You wouldn't, she whispered. Lex smirked. I already did. He slid a manila folder across the table. Juliet hesitated before opening it, and when she did, she nearly collapsed. Inside were court documents. Filed this morning. Lex Calloway versus Juliet Calloway. Emergency custody request. She stared in horror. You planned this, she breathed. Lex leaned in, his voice deadly soft. From the moment I found out the twins weren't mine. Juliet's body went ice cold. Her worst nightmare had come true. She wasn't just losing. She had already lost. Roman sat in his penthouse, waiting. For what? He wasn't sure. Maybe for Juliet to call. Maybe for Lex to strike again. Maybe for the walls to finally collapse around him. And then, the knock came. Firm. Final. Roman's chest tightened. He opened the door. 2 police officers. His blood turned to ice. Roman Thatcher? One of them asked. Roman forced a tight smile. Can I help you, officers? The second officer pulled out a warrant. You're under arrest for fraud, obstruction of justice, and bribery. Roman's stomach dropped. What? His voice cracked. No, this is a mistake. But they were already stepping inside. Already cuffing him. As they led him toward the elevator, his phone buzzed in his pocket. With trembling hands he glanced at the screen. Lex. A single message. Checkmate. Roman's breath hitched. This wasn't just a custody battle. This wasn't just revenge. Lex had buried him. And now, he was going to rot for it. Eleanor Calloway had been untouchable. A woman who had ruled Boston's elite with grace and cruelty. She had always known how to pull the right strings, how to bend people, even laws, to her will. But as she sat in her penthouse, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon, she knew. This was the end. Her phone rang. She didn't need to check the caller ID. She already knew who it was. Lex. She answered, keeping her voice smooth. Darling. Lex's tone was calm. Controlled. Dangerous. Your offshore accounts have been frozen. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the glass. Lex continued, your judge connections? Exposed. The charities you've been stealing from? The press already has the documents. And the board of trustees. A small pause. They voted you out this morning. A single crack splintered down Eleanor's carefully composed mask. She took a slow sip of bourbon. Well, I suppose congratulations are in order. Lex chuckled. You're surprisingly calm for a woman who just lost everything. Eleanor exhaled. Because I always knew this day would come. Lex wasn't expecting that. She continued, You always had it in you, Lex. I knew it from the moment you were born. That ruthlessness. That precision. She set her glass down, staring out at the city skyline. And now, she murmured, I have no more moves left. A beat of silence. Then Lex's voice, low and final. Good. And then he hung up. Eleanor closed her eyes, the weight of everything crashing down on her. For the first time in her life, she had lost. Juliet sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel with trembling hands. Her world had crumbled in a matter of days. Her money? Gone. Roman? Gone. Her power? Stripped away. And worst of all? Lex had won custody of the twins. Her chest tightened with panic. This couldn't be happening. She had spent years crafting the perfect lie, bending the world to her will, always staying one step ahead. But now she was the one gasping for air. The court had sided with Lex without hesitation. The judge had barely even looked at her. The evidence was too damning, the recordings, the financial records, the schemes. She had walked into that courtroom thinking she could still manipulate her way out. But the moment she saw Lex sitting there, calm, composed, victorious, she knew. He had already beaten her. Now she sat outside his house, watching from a distance as the lights inside glowed warm and safe. Her children were in there. Her boys. Her last chance at holding on to anything that mattered. And she wasn't going to let him take them without a fight. Juliet wiped her eyes and picked up her phone. She dialed, her breath shaky as the call connected. Juliet, Patricia Cross's voice came through the line, exasperated. Please tell me you're not about to do something stupid. Juliet bit down on her lip. I'm not losing them, she whispered. Not like this. Patricia sighed. The judge's ruling is final, Juliet. If you try to fight it, you'll only make it worse. Juliet gritted her teeth. She had already lost everything. How could it get worse? Unless she took matters into her own hands. A dangerous thought crept into her mind. A thought she had never allowed herself to consider before. If she couldn't win legally, she'd just have to take them. Lex had finally allowed himself a moment of peace. For the first time in months he could breathe. The war was over. Roman was in prison. His mother was disgraced and exiled. And Juliet? She had nothing left. Most importantly, his sons were safe. He stood in the kitchen, watching them play in the living room, their laughter filling the house. This was what he had fought for. This was what mattered. But peace never lasted long. A knock at the door made him frown. He hadn't been expecting anyone. His gut twisted. Something was wrong. He stepped forward, checking the security camera on his phone. And his blood ran ice cold. Juliet. Standing at the door, her face pale, hollow-eyed, desperate. Lex's jaw tightened. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He wasn't afraid of her. She had no power left. But she was still dangerous. Lex opened the door just enough to block her view inside. You shouldn't be here. Juliet's lip trembled. Lex, please. I just want to see them. Lex's eyes hardened. That's not going to happen. She reached for his arm. Lex, they're my children. Lex pulled away, his voice cold as steel. No, Juliet. They were never yours. You don't get to call yourself their mother after what you did. Juliet broke. The last threads of control snapped as she lunged forward. Lex caught her wrists midair. He had expected this. Let me in, she screamed, struggling against his grip. Lex held firm. You're trespassing. You have no legal rights anymore. She sobbed, shaking in his grasp. I have nothing left, Lex. Lex's jaw ticked. That's not my problem. And then she snapped. Juliet jerked back, her eyes wild. And before he could react, she reached for something in her pocket. Lex barely had time to process the flash of metal before. A knife. Juliet lunged. Lex dodged, twisting her wrist sharply. The knife clattered to the ground. Juliet collapsed against him, sobbing. You ruined me. Lex exhaled slowly, his grip steady, unshaken. No, Juliet. He pushed her away, watching as she fell to the ground. You ruined yourself. The sirens came fast. Within minutes, police cars swarmed the house. Juliet was still sobbing, curled on the front porch. The officers wasted no time. They yanked her up, cuffing her hands behind her back. "Juliet Calloway," one of them said, "you're under arrest for attempted assault, violation of a court order, and trespassing." Juliet screamed. "No. You don't understand. He took everything." Lex watched, his face emotionless. She thrashed as they pulled her toward the police car. "Lex, tell them. Tell them this is a mistake." Lex said nothing. Because this was no mistake. This was karma. The woman who had stolen his marriage. The woman who had deceived him. The woman who had made him raise another man's children. She was finally paying the price. The police slammed the door shut, muffling her screams. One of the officers turned to Lex. "Do you want to press additional charges?" Lex hesitated. Not because he felt bad for her. He didn't. But because there was nothing left to take. She had already lost everything. Lex exhaled. "No," he said simply. "This is enough." Juliet had destroyed herself. And now, she would rot in the consequences. As the police cars drove away, Lex turned back to his house. The twins were watching through the window, confused, uncertain. He took a deep breath, calming himself before stepping inside. This war was over. And for the first time in 7 years, Lex was free. The house was silent. Lex stood in the dim glow of the living room, staring at the door where Juliet had been dragged away in cuffs just hours earlier. It should have felt like victory. And in some ways it did. She was gone. No more threats, no more manipulation, no more chaos. But as he turned to look at the twins, his sons even if not by blood, he saw something else. Noah sat on the couch, knees tucked to his chest, while Liam curled into the corner, silent. They had watched everything. Lex exhaled slowly, kneeling in front of them. "Come here," he murmured, opening his arms. For a moment they hesitated. And then they rushed into him. Lex held them tightly, feeling their small bodies shake against him. Noah's voice was muffled against his shirt. "Is Mom going to jail?" Lex swallowed. How did he even begin to explain? "She did something bad," Lex said carefully. "And when people break the law, they have to face the consequences." Liam sniffled. "But she's still our mom." Lex closed his eyes. Yes, she was. A liar. A manipulator. A woman who had betrayed him in the worst way possible. But to them, she was still Mom. And no amount of revenge could change that. Lex ran a hand through their hair, steadying himself. "I know," he murmured. "I know, buddy." And as they clung to him, he realized, this was the cost of war. He had won. But at what price? Lex hadn't spoken to Eleanor since her downfall. Since the moment she had lost everything. But now, she was the one reaching out. Her name flashed across his phone screen, and for a long moment he just stared at it. Eleanor Calloway had once been untouchable. A woman of power, wealth, and influence. Now, she was a relic of her own destruction. Lex finally picked up. "Mother." She exhaled, her voice as smooth as ever. "Lex, we need to talk." Lex leaned back in his chair. "Do we?" Pause. Then her voice sharpened. "You've proven your point, Lex. You destroyed everything I built. Took away my power. My name. My legacy." Lex said nothing. Eleanor let out a soft laugh. "But you and I both know. I always have a backup plan." Lex's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" Eleanor's voice dropped. "You." Lex stilled. She continued, "You think you've won. But all you've done is create a vacuum of power. Juliet is gone. Roman is in prison. And me? Well, you took care of that, didn't you?" Lex's grip on the phone tightened. "You're going to regret taking me down, Lex," she whispered. "Because now, you're alone. And you'll find that ruling the ruins of an empire is a very lonely business." Lex exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm. "You don't get it, do you?" he said softly. Eleanor was silent. Lex leaned forward, his voice steady. "I don't need an empire. I don't need power. I never did." A beat of silence. Then Eleanor laughed. A slow, hollow sound. "Then I suppose you're a better man than me," she murmured. And with that she hung up. Lex exhaled slowly, staring at the phone. He didn't know what was coming next. But for the first time, he didn't care. Because he was finally free. Lex stood in the doorway of his house, watching as the morning light poured in. For the first time in years he felt something unfamiliar. No more games. No more lies. Just him and his sons stepping into the future together. Noah ran past him, chasing Liam outside. Their laughter echoed across the yard, and Lex felt it deep in his chest. He had spent so long fighting. Now, it was time to live. He smiled, stepping out into the sunlight. And for the first time in 7 years, Lex Calloway was truly, completely free. Roman Thatcher sat in a prison cell, staring at the cold, gray walls around him. His entire life, the power, the wealth, the reputation had collapsed overnight. All because of Lex. No, all because of Juliet. She had played him, lied to him, convinced him that they could have it all. And now, she was locked in a cell and so was he. But unlike Juliet, he still had a chance. The metal bars clanked open and his lawyer, Mason Harper, stepped inside. Roman sat up, running a hand down his face. "Tell me you have good news." Mason sighed, placing a stack of papers on the table. "Depends on what you consider good." Roman's stomach tightened. "Give it to me straight." Mason folded his hands. "You're facing 15 years minimum. Fraud, bribery, obstruction of justice. And let's not forget your attempt to have Lex killed." Roman winced. "And the alternative?" Mason exhaled. "Lex made an offer." Roman's breath hitched. He wasn't sure what shocked him more, the fact that Lex was still pulling the strings or the fact that he was willing to make a deal. Mason slid the papers across the table. Roman scanned them quickly, his hands shaking. If he signed this, he'd walk away with only 5 years. Lesser charges. A chance at an early release. But there was one condition. He could never return to Boston. Could never step foot near Lex, the twins, or anything tied to his old life. Roman swallowed hard. Why would he do this? Mason gave him a knowing look. Because he's already won, Roman. You're not a threat to him anymore. Roman clenched his jaw. Lex wasn't offering mercy. He was offering exile. A final, brutal reminder that Roman no longer mattered. His hands shook as he grabbed the pen. And with one signature, Roman Thatcher disappeared. Juliet sat in a small, windowless room, staring at the table in front of her. The cuffs on her wrists felt heavier than chains. The walls felt closer, tighter. This was real. This was her life now. The door creaked open and her lawyer, Patricia Cross, walked in, her face blank. Juliet forced a smile. "Tell me you have a plan." Patricia sat down, her expression unreadable. "Lex isn't pressing additional charges." Juliet let out a breath of relief. "So I can." "You're still going away, Juliet." The words hit like a slap. Juliet froze. "What?" Patricia placed a folder on the table. "You broke a court order. You attempted assault. You plotted to frame Lex for drug possession. And let's not forget your involvement in the hitman scheme. There's no way out." Juliet's chest tightened. This wasn't happening. No. She was supposed to win. She was supposed to come out on top. Patricia continued, "Your only option is to take the deal." Juliet clenched her jaw. "What deal?" Patricia exhaled, pushing a document forward. "You plead guilty to all charges. No trial. No fighting. In exchange, you get 7 years instead of 20. Juliet's vision blurred. 7 years. 7 years in prison. Her hands shook as she pushed the papers away. "No. I won't do it." Patricia leaned back, watching her carefully. "Then you'll die in here, Juliet." Juliet's heart pounded. She wasn't built for this. She wasn't built for prison cells and gray walls and locked doors. She was built for high society, designer clothes, luxury vacations. She had spent her entire life fighting for power. And now, she had nothing. Her vision spun. Her chest tightened. And for the first time, Juliet Calloway finally understood. She had lost. For real. For good. Lex stood on the balcony of his home, watching as the sun dipped behind the Boston skyline. The war was over. Roman was gone. Juliet was rotting in a cell. Eleanor was a ghost of her former self. And him? He was finally free. Derek Vance leaned against the railing beside him, sipping a drink. "You did it." Lex chuckled. "Took long enough." Derek smirked. "Most people would have settled for a divorce." Lex turned to him. "Most people wouldn't have been played for 7 years." Derek nodded. "Fair enough." The cool night breeze rolled through, carrying a sense of finality. Lex took a deep breath, his mind finally clear. He had spent years being someone else's fool. Now, He was his own man again. Derek clinked his glass against Lex's. So, what's next for Dr. Calloway? Lex exhaled, watching the city below. For the first time in years he didn't have an answer. And he was okay with that. Because for the first time in years he wasn't looking over his shoulder. For the first time in years he wasn't living in a lie. For the first time in years he was finally, completely free. Lex Calloway had spent months tearing down the people who had betrayed him. Now he stood in the aftermath, staring at the quiet, empty house, realizing something he hadn't expected. Winning didn't feel like he thought it would. Yes, Juliet was gone. Yes, Roman was out of the picture. Yes, Eleanor had lost everything. But there was no satisfaction in standing alone. The twins were asleep upstairs, safe, unaware of the war their father had just finished fighting. And yet, Lex couldn't shake the emptiness. This entire time he had been driven by revenge. But now that it was over, what was left? The knock at the door startled him. Lex wasn't expecting visitors. He grabbed his phone and checked the security camera. His shoulders tensed. Eleanor. Her hair was neatly styled, her expensive coat draped over her shoulders, but she looked tired. Older. Lex debated ignoring her. But something in him needed to see this through. He opened the door, keeping his expression cold. Why are you here? Eleanor gave him a long, calculated look. May I come in? Lex didn't move. You lost everything. What more do you want? She sighed. To talk. One last time. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he stepped aside. Eleanor sat at the dining table, looking around at the house she had once visited as a mother. Now she was a stranger here. Lex leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Say what you came to say. Eleanor exhaled, tracing the rim of her glass. You were always different, you know, she murmured. Even as a child. You had that fire in you. The need to win. To be the best. Lex's jaw clenched. You mean the need to survive? She smirked. Same thing. Lex narrowed his eyes. Is this why you came? To play mind games? Because I'm not in the mood. Eleanor finally looked at him, something raw in her gaze. You won, she said simply. You took everything from me. Lex didn't blink. I didn't take anything from you, Mother. You did that to yourself. Silence. Then, a small laugh. Eleanor shook her head. I suppose I did. Lex studied her. So why are you really here? Eleanor hesitated. Then, for the first time in his life, Lex saw something real in her eyes. Regret. I was wrong about you, she admitted. I thought you were weak. Thought I needed to control you, shape you. But you were always stronger than I gave you credit for. Lex felt his chest tighten, but he didn't let it show. You don't get to rewrite history. I'm not trying to, Eleanor said softly. I just wanted you to know. I'm proud of you. Lex's breath hitched. She stood, smoothing down her coat. This is the last time we'll see each other. Lex swallowed hard. Where are you going? Eleanor gave a small, sad smile. Somewhere I can disappear. Lex didn't say anything as she walked to the door. And then, just before stepping out, she paused. For what it's worth, she murmured, I did love you. In my own way. Lex stared at her. And then, without another word, Eleanor Calloway walked out of his life forever. It took a long time for Lex to believe it was really over. He still woke up expecting the next battle, the next betrayal. But there were no more threats. No more enemies. Just him and the twins starting over. One morning he sat outside watching as Noah and Liam played in the yard. They had no idea how close they had come to being used as weapons in a war. Lex had fought for them. And he had won. A voice pulled him from his thoughts. You look like a man who just got out of hell. Lex turned. Derek Vance stood at the gate, smirking. Lex smirked back. Something like that. Derek walked up, hands in his pockets. So what now? You going back to work? Lex sighed. I don't know. You should, Derek said. You're a damn good surgeon. Lex ran a hand through his hair. I spent so much time tearing my past apart, I never really thought about the future. Derek nodded. Well, here's your future, man. Right there. Lex followed Derek's gaze, to his son's. Happy. Free. Safe. Lex exhaled. Yeah, he murmured. I guess it is. Derek clapped him on the shoulder. You did good, Calloway. Lex didn't say anything. Because for the first time he believed it. Lex Calloway had spent years living in a lie. Then he spent months tearing that lie apart. Now he had to figure out what came next. He stood in the hospital's main lobby, staring at the walls that had once felt like his second home. St. Joseph's Medical Center. It had been 3 months since he had last stepped foot in this building. Since he had last operated. Since he had last held a scalpel in his hands and felt the certainty of saving a life. After everything that had happened, he wasn't sure if he belonged here anymore. But then, Dr. Meredith Langston spotted him from across the hall. "Lex." He turned, his gut tightening. She looked the same, sharp, confident, no-nonsense. The woman who had unknowingly started everything when she had handed him the DNA results that shattered his life. "Didn't think I'd ever see you here again," she said, crossing her arms. Lex gave a tight smile. "I wasn't sure if I'd come back." Meredith studied him. "You ready?" Lex exhaled, looking past her at the familiar halls. The place where he had once believed in science and certainty. The place that had given him a sense of purpose. Was he ready? "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't even know if I still have a place here." Meredith smirked. "You're Lex Calloway." "Of course you do." Lex huffed a small laugh. Then, Meredith stepped closer, her expression softening. "For what it's worth," she said, "I never told you this, but I was sorry. When I gave you those DNA results, I didn't realize what I was unraveling." Lex met her gaze. "It wasn't your fault," he said simply. "Because it wasn't. Juliet, Roman, Eleanor, they were the ones who had destroyed everything." Meredith nodded. "Well, for what it's worth, we could use you back in the OR. You've got the best hands in this hospital." Lex hesitated. It had been so long since he'd held a scalpel. Since he had felt in control of something other than his revenge. Finally he exhaled. "Maybe it's time." Meredith smirked. "Good. Because I already put your name on the schedule." Lex chuckled. "You never changed, Langston." "Neither do you, Calloway," she shot back. "You just forgot who you were for a while." Lex nodded slowly. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to remember. That night, after the twins had gone to bed, Lex sat outside on the back porch, watching the city lights in the distance. He had won. He had survived. But there was still one conversation left to have. The one he had been avoiding. His phone buzzed. A message. "Unknown number, it's been a while. I didn't expect you to reach out." Lex exhaled, gripping the phone tighter. "Lex, we need to talk." The dots appeared. Then, "Unknown number, when and where?" Lex hesitated. Then typed, "Lex, tomorrow. My house. 10 a.m. The response was immediate. "Unknown number, I'll be there." Lex set the phone down, exhaling slowly. Because tomorrow? Tomorrow he was finally going to meet the real father of his children. The next morning, Lex stood in the doorway watching as a black SUV pulled up in front of the house. His chest tightened. Then the door opened. And the man who stepped out? Lex already knew him. They had never met in person, but Lex had seen his face before. Colton Shaw. A high-profile businessman. A name Lex had seen buried in Juliet's financial records. A name Lex had found in the hospital files. The real father of Noah and Liam. Colton walked up the driveway, his expression unreadable. Lex stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You took your time." Colton exhaled. "I didn't think this day would ever come." Lex studied him. "So why now?" Colton met his gaze. "Because they're my kids." Lex's chest tightened. His fingers curled into fists. "Not to them," Lex said quietly. "They don't even know you exist." Colton hesitated. "I want to meet them." Lex's jaw ticked. "You had 7 years, Shaw. 7 years. And you never once tried to be a father." Colton's face darkened. "You think I didn't want to? Juliet made sure I stayed out of their lives. She told me I'd ruin everything if I came forward." Lex clenched his teeth. Of course she had. That was what she did. Colton exhaled, running a hand down his face. "Look, I'm not here to take them from you. I want to know them." Lex's chest felt heavy. These were his sons. Maybe not by blood, but in every other way that mattered. And now this man wanted to step in. Lex exhaled slowly. "I won't let them get hurt again." Colton nodded. "I don't want that either." A long silence stretched between them. Then finally, Lex stepped back. "Come inside," he said. "Because maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. Maybe this was a new beginning." Lex Calloway had spent 7 years living in a lie. Then he had spent months tearing that lie apart. Now he was standing in something unfamiliar. The future. The twins were sitting on the living room floor, playing with their toys, their laughter filling the house. And across from him, Colton Shaw sat on the couch. The man who was biologically their father. The man Juliet had kept hidden from them. The man who had come back too late. Colton was watching them closely. Lex studied him. "You nervous?" Lex asked. Colton chuckled. "Terrified." Lex nodded. "Good. You should be. Because meeting his kids now, after all these years, wasn't going to be easy." Noah looked up first. "Dad." Lex felt it in his chest. He would never get used to hearing that word from them. Never stop feeling the weight of it. He turned to them, steadying himself. "There's someone I want you to meet," Lex said carefully. Liam frowned. "Who?" Lex hesitated. How do you explain something like this to a child? But before he could, Colton spoke up. "My name's Colton," he said gently. I knew your mom a long time ago." The twins glanced at each other. Noah tilted his head. "You knew Mom?" Colton's smile was small. "Set. Yeah, buddy. I did." A silence stretched. Then, Liam turned back to Lex. "But you're our dad." Lex felt his throat tighten. He nodded. "Yeah, kid. I am." Because fatherhood wasn't just about blood. It was about the sleepless nights, the scraped knees, the bedtime stories. It was about being there. And no matter what, Lex had been there. Colton swallowed hard. "I don't want to take anything away from you, Lex. I just want to know them." Lex studied him. This man, the real father in the biological sense, was finally stepping up. But was that enough? Lex exhaled. "I'll think about it," he said. Because this wasn't about him. It was about them. And for the first time, Lex wasn't making choices out of revenge. He was making them for his sons. Colton nodded. "That's all I can ask." Lex glanced back at the twins, watching as they returned to their game. His sons. His family. No matter how this ended, that would never change. The end. But not really. Because life doesn't just stop when the revenge is over. Lex Calloway learned that the hard way. You don't just tear down the past. You don't just win the battle and walk away. You have to build something new. And that's the real war. So let me ask you something. If you were in Lex's shoes, would you let Colton be a part of the twins' lives? Or would you shut him out forever? Drop a comment. I want to hear what you would do. And if you made it this far, you're part of this story now. So hit subscribe, like, and share, because trust me, this isn't the last story I'm telling. Until next time, stay sharp. And remember, sometimes revenge isn't the end. It's just the beginning.